The dusty streets of Fort Davis, Texas, felt emptier than usual as Millicent Owens stood on the porch of the general store, clutching a letter she had just written to her cousin in St. Louis, watching the Pony Express rider thunder past without so much as a glance in her direction. It was April of 1861, and the world felt like it was spinning on the edge of something catastrophic, with war brewing back east and tensions running high even in this remote corner of West Texas. Millicent had been writing letters for 6 months now, pouring her heart onto paper about her struggles running the general store after her father's death, about the loneliness that crept into her bones during the long desert nights, about her dreams of expanding the business despite being only 22 years old and unmarried in a town that whispered about spinsters and impropriety. She had sent dozens of letters, faithfully paying the exorbitant fees for Pony Express delivery, yet not once had she received a response from her cousin Clara, who had been her closest confidante since childhood. The silence hurt more than she cared to admit. Clara had promised to write back, to send news of the city, to perhaps even visit if circumstances allowed. But month after month brought nothing but disappointment, and the growing suspicion that perhaps Clara had simply forgotten about her poor relation stuck in the desert wasteland of Texas. Millicent tucked the latest letter into her skirt pocket and turned back into the store, the bell above the door jingling softly. The shelves needed restocking, the floors needed sweeping, and she had orders to fill for 3 different ranches before the week's end. Work was the only thing that kept her mind from dwelling on the isolation, on the fact that she was utterly alone in this world, except for the transient customers who passed through Fort Davis on their way to somewhere more important. The town itself sat nestled in the Davis Mountains, a military post that had brought some civilization to this harsh landscape. The fort proper housed soldiers who protected the mail routes and wagon trains from Apache raids, though relations with the local tribes had been relatively peaceful in recent months. The civilian settlement that had sprung up around the fort consisted of maybe 200 souls, most of them men working as freighters, ranchers, or merchants. Respectable women were scarce, which made Millicent's position both precarious and essential. She was one of the few unmarried women who ran her own business, and the men treated her with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. She was restocking the flour sacks when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of a scuffle, and then a sharp cry of pain. Millicent hurried to the window and peered through the dusty glass to see 2 men in the street, one pinning the other against the hitching post with considerable force. The man doing the pinning was Flynn Zimmer, a rancher whose spread lay about 15 miles south of town. She knew him by reputation more than personal acquaintance. He was maybe 26 or 27, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had come to town perhaps a dozen times in the past year, always keeping to himself, always conducting his business with quiet efficiency. There were rumors about him, whispered stories about why a man so young owned such a substantial ranch, about family tragedy and inherited wealth, and a temperament that could turn dangerous if provoked. The man he had pinned was immediately recognizable even from a distance. Tommy Watts, the Pony Express rider who had been running the Fort Davis route for the better part of a year. He was younger than Flynn, maybe 23, with sandy hair and a wiry build suited for long hours in the saddle. Millicent pushed through the door and stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun. Other townspeople were gathering now, drawn by the spectacle. Violence was not uncommon in Fort Davis, but it usually involved drunken soldiers or arguments over card games, not respectable businessmen attacking mail carriers, Flynn's voice carried clearly across the street, low and dangerous. "I am going to ask you one more time, Watts. Where are the letters?" Tommy squirmed in his grip, his face flushed with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I do not know what you are talking about. I deliver every piece of mail that comes through. I am a professional. You are a liar and a thief." Flynn's grip tightened and Tommy let out a yelp. "I have been tracking you for 3 weeks. I know what you have been doing. I have witnesses who saw you sorting through the mail pouches, taking out letters that were not addressed to you. I have testimony from riders on other routes who said you bragged about reading other people's correspondence." Millicent's breath caught in her throat. Letters. Missing letters. Could it be possible? Tommy's resistance crumbled suddenly, his shoulders sagging. All right. I took some letters. So what? Nobody was getting hurt. I was just curious about what people were writing. It gets boring out there on the trail, and reading stories about other people's lives made the miles go faster. The crowd murmured with disapproval. The sanctity of the mail was sacred in the West, where communication was the only thread connecting isolated settlements to the wider world. A man who stole letters was lower than a horse thief in the estimation of most decent folk. Flynn did not release his grip. "Where are they? All of them. Every single letter you stole. They are at my boarding house, under the floorboards in my room." "But listen, mister, I did not steal anything valuable. I did not take no money or nothing like that. Just letters." "Just letters," Flynn repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Just the only connection some people have to their families. Just the words that might mean the difference between hope and despair for someone waiting for news. Just letters." He released Tommy with a shove that sent the younger man stumbling. "You are going to retrieve every single letter you stole. Then you are going to deliver each one personally, with an apology, to the person it was meant for. And if you ever touch mail that does not belong to you again, I will make sure you never work for any delivery service west of the Mississippi. Do you understand me?" Tommy nodded frantically, rubbing his throat. "Yes, sir. I understand. I will get them right now." "I am coming with you," Flynn said. "And then we are going to start making deliveries together. I want to look into the eyes of every person whose trust you violated." They disappeared into the boarding house, and the crowd slowly dispersed, returning to their daily routines with something new to gossip about. Millicent stood frozen on her porch, her mind racing. Could some of her missing letters be in that collection? Could this explain why Clara had never responded? She was still standing there 20 minutes later when Flynn and Tommy emerged from the boarding house, Tommy carrying a bulging canvas sack. They crossed the street directly toward the general store, and Millicent's heart began to pound. Flynn climbed the steps first, his expression grim. Up close, she could see the details that distance had obscured. The fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the calluses on his hands from hard work, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination and barely controlled anger. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but there was also a sadness in his eyes that struck her unexpectedly. "Miss Owens," he said, removing his hat. His voice was different now, gentler. "I apologize for the disturbance, but I have reason to believe this man has been stealing your correspondence." Tommy stepped forward reluctantly, reaching into the sack. He pulled out a handful of envelopes, all addressed in different hands but bearing Millicent's name and the Fort Davis address. Her vision blurred as she recognized Clara's handwriting on several of them. "How many?" she whispered. Tommy's face flushed with shame. 17 from your cousin in St. Louis, a few from other folks too, business correspondence mostly. 17 letters. 17 times Clara had written to her. 17 times she had believed herself forgotten and abandoned, when in reality her cousin had been faithfully responding all along. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, and she had to grip the porch railing to steady herself. Flynn's hand appeared at her elbow, supporting her with surprising gentleness. "Perhaps you should sit down, Miss Owens. This is quite a shock." She let him guide her to the bench beside the door, her legs suddenly unsteady. Tommy stood before her, the letters clutched in his hands, looking like a schoolboy called before the headmistress. "I am truly sorry, Miss Owens," he mumbled. "I did not mean no real harm. Your cousin, she writes real pretty stories about city life, and I just enjoyed reading them. I did not think about how it would make you feel, not getting responses." Millicent looked up at him, and the anger that surged through her burned away the shock. "You did not think? For 6 months I believed my only living relative had abandoned me. For 6 months I poured my heart into letters describing my loneliness, my struggles, my fears, and I thought she simply did not care enough to respond. You stole more than paper and ink, Mr. Watts. You stole my peace of mind. You stole my connection to the only family I have left." Her voice broke on the last word, and she hated herself for the tears that spilled down her cheeks. She never cried in public, had learned to project strength and capability even when she felt like she was drowning. But this betrayal cut too deep. Flynn crouched down beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Miss Owens, I give you my word that Watts here is going to make this right. He is going to deliver every single one of your cousin's letters to you personally. And he is going to stay while you read them so he can see exactly what his theft cost you. And then he is going to write a letter of his own to your cousin, explaining what he did and apologizing for the delay in your responses." Millicent wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care about stolen letters?" Something flickered across Flynn's face, pain and memory intertwined. "Because 3 years ago, I was waiting for a letter that never came. My brother was dying of fever in California, and he wrote to me asking me to come. The letter got lost somewhere in the mail system, maybe stolen, maybe just misplaced. By the time I learned he had written, by the time I made it to California, he had been dead for 2 months. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him that I loved him, and that I was sorry for the argument we had the last time we spoke." The raw grief in his voice made Millicent's breath catch. She understood loss, had felt the hollow ache of it when her father died of pneumonia 2 winters ago. But to be denied even the chance to reconcile, to be left forever with words unsaid because someone had failed in their duty to deliver mail, that was a special kind of torture. "I am so sorry," she said softly. Flynn stood, his expression hardening as he turned back to Tommy. "Which is why I take the sanctity of the mail very seriously. Start delivering the letters, Watts. Right now. Miss Owens, if you will allow it, I would like to stay while he delivers each one. I want to make sure he fulfills his obligation." Millicent nodded, not trusting her voice. Tommy handed her the first letter, dated 6 months prior, just days after she had sent her initial letter to Clara describing her father's death. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. Clara's words poured over her like cool water in the desert. Condolences and love, memories of visiting Fort Davis as children, promises to help financially if Millicent needed it, encouragement to stay strong and keep fighting to maintain the store. All the comfort and support she had desperately needed during those dark months, finally reaching her. She read through her tears while Flynn and Tommy stood silent witness. When she finished the first letter, Tommy handed her the second, then the third. Each one was a revelation, a piece of the conversation she should have been having all along. Clara wrote about her life in St. Louis, about the growing tensions over secession, about her work teaching at a girls' school, about her own loneliness as an unmarried woman in her late 20s. She asked questions about Millicent's life, questions that had gone unanswered because the letters had been stolen before Millicent ever knew they existed. It took nearly 2 hours to read through all 17 letters. The sun was sinking toward the mountains by the time Millicent looked up from the last one, her eyes red and swollen but her heart somehow lighter than it had been in months. She was not alone. She had never been alone. Clara loved her and had been thinking of her all this time. Tommy stood with his head bowed, tears tracking down his own face. "I am so sorry, Miss Owens. I did not understand. I swear I did not understand what I was taking from you." Millicent folded the last letter carefully and placed it with the others. "You will write to Clara explaining what happened. You will also write to the Pony Express Company and resign your position, because I do not believe you are fit to carry mail anymore. And you will pay back every cent I spent on postage for letters that you prevented from reaching me." "Yes, madam," Tommy whispered. "All of it. I will do all of it." Flynn nodded with satisfaction. "We have other deliveries to make. There are 43 letters in that sack, stolen from at least 20 different people in and around Fort Davis. We are going to spend the next few days delivering them all personally. Miss Owens, again, I apologize for what you have endured." He settled his hat back on his head and turned to leave, but Millicent found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Mr. Zimmer, would you join me for supper this evening? It is the least I can do to thank you for uncovering this theft and ensuring justice was done." Flynn paused, surprise crossing his features. "That is kind of you, Miss Owens, but not necessary. I only did what any decent person would do. Nevertheless, I would appreciate the company. I eat alone most nights, and after today, after learning that I have not been forgotten after all, I find I would like to share a meal with someone, please." Something in her voice must have reached him, because his expression softened. "In that case, I would be honored. What time should I return?" "Give me an hour to close the store and prepare something. There is a stairway on the side of the building that leads up to my living quarters. You can knock there." After Flynn and Tommy left to continue their rounds of enforced contrition, Millicent sat for a long moment on the bench, Clara's letters pressed against her chest. The world had shifted somehow in the space of an afternoon. The loneliness that had felt like a permanent condition now seemed less absolute. And there was something about Flynn Zimmer, about the grief in his eyes and the steel in his spine and the gentleness with which he had supported her through her shock, that made her want to know him better. She rose and went inside to close up the store, her movements more purposeful than they had been in months. She had to take inventory, sweep the floors, balance the day's receipts, and prepare a meal, all within the hour. But for the first time in a long time, she found herself humming as she worked. Her living quarters above the store were modest but comfortable. A main room that served as kitchen and parlor, a small bedroom, and a tiny washroom with a basin and mirror. She had made attempts to brighten the space with curtains sewn from calico fabric, and a few wildflowers arranged in a chipped vase, but it still felt sparse and lonely most days. Tonight, though, she looked at it with fresh eyes and saw the potential. She lit the lamps to chase away the encroaching darkness, stoked the stove, and began preparing a meal from the supplies in her pantry. Beans that had been soaking since morning, cornbread made from her own recipe, fried salt pork, and canned peaches for dessert. Simple fare, but honest and filling. She had just pulled the cornbread from the oven when she heard the knock at the door. Her heart gave an unexpected flutter, and she had to wipe her suddenly damp palms on her apron before answering. Flynn stood on the landing, his hat in his hands. He had cleaned up since the afternoon, washing away the trail dust and changing into a clean shirt. His dark hair was still damp, curling slightly at the ends. "Come in," Millicent said, stepping aside. "Please make yourself comfortable." He entered slowly, his eyes taking in the details of her home with the careful assessment of a man used to evaluating his surroundings. She wondered what he saw, what judgments he was making about her character based on the worn furniture and sparse decorations. "It smells wonderful," he said finally. "I confess I have been living mostly on my own cooking for the past few years, and my skills in the kitchen are sorely lacking. This is a rare treat. Please sit." Millicent gestured to the small table by the window. She had set it with her mother's china, one of the few nice things she had left from her previous life. "How many deliveries did you and Mr. Watts complete?" Flynn settled into the chair, which creaked slightly under his weight. "6 more after leaving you. We will continue tomorrow. Some of the recipients live quite far from town, so it will take a few days to reach everyone. But Watts will fulfill his obligation or answer to me." Millicent brought the food to the table, serving Flynn first before taking her own seat. "You are very committed to seeing justice done." Most men would have simply reported him to the authorities and let them handle the matter. The military authorities have enough to worry about with the situation back east. Besides, I find that sometimes personal accountability is more effective than official punishment. Watts needs to see the faces of the people he hurt. He needs to understand that his actions had real consequences for real human beings. They began to eat, and for a few minutes silence reigned, broken only by the clink of utensils against china. Millicent studied Flynn covertly across the table. There was a gravity about him, a sense of someone who had seen hardship and been shaped by it. But there was also kindness in the way he thanked her for each serving, in the careful way he ate as though aware of not causing offense. "How did you discover what Mr. Watts was doing?" she asked finally. "You said you had been tracking him for 3 weeks. Flynn set down his fork and met her eyes. "I have a friend, another rancher, who lives east of here near Fort Stockton. His wife had been writing to her sister regularly, but the sister never responded. The wife grew increasingly distraught, fearing something terrible had happened. My friend wrote to the sister's husband directly and discovered that the sister had been sending letters all along. They compared dates and routes and realized the letters were disappearing somewhere along the Pony Express line. When I heard about it, I thought of my own lost letter from my brother, and I decided to investigate. And you discovered Mr. Watts was the culprit. It took some time. I rode part of the route with him, claiming I needed to scout for new grazing lands. I watched him when we made stops, and eventually I saw him sorting through the mail pouch when he thought no one was looking, pulling out letters that seemed interesting to him. I confronted him privately first, but he denied everything. So I went to his boarding house when I knew he was out on a run and found the cache of stolen letters. Then I waited for him to return and made sure there were witnesses when I confronted him publicly." Millicent felt a surge of admiration for the methodical way Flynn had pursued justice, not for himself but for strangers who had been wronged. "You went to considerable trouble for people you do not even know." "Someone needed to," Flynn said simply, "and I had the means and the time to do it." "Tell me about your brother," Millicent said softly, "if it is not too painful to speak of." Flynn was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Lucas was 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we were inseparable. We worked our father's ranch together, dreamed together about expanding it, making it something substantial. But when our parents died in a cholera outbreak, everything changed. Lucas wanted to sell the ranch and move to California, chase the gold fields and start fresh somewhere new. I wanted to stay, to honor our parents' legacy by keeping the land they had worked so hard to build." He paused, his jaw tightening. We argued terribly, said things we did not mean, at least I hope we did not mean them. Lucas left for California and I stayed. We did not speak for nearly a year. And then I learned through a mutual acquaintance that he had died. The letter he wrote asking me to come, telling me he was sick and wanted to reconcile, that letter never reached me. And now I will never know if he forgave me. I will never get to tell him I was wrong, that I should have valued our brotherhood over some piece of land. Millicent reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I think he knew. Brothers who love each other as deeply as you clearly loved him, they know the truth beneath the angry words. He knew you loved him. Flynn turned his hand over, gently grasping hers. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, a connection that felt both natural and startling in its intensity. Thank you for saying that. It helps, even if I cannot be sure it is true. They remained like that for a moment, hands joined across the table, sharing the kind of comfortable silence that usually took years to develop between two people. Finally, Flynn withdrew his hand with visible reluctance and returned to his meal. "What about you?" he asked. "How did you come to be running a store by yourself in Fort Davis? It is not common for a woman to manage a business alone." Millicent poured coffee for them both before answering. "My father brought me here 5 years ago. My mother had died of consumption when I was 16, and he could not bear to stay in Missouri where everything reminded him of her. He heard the Army was establishing a permanent fort here and thought there would be opportunities for a merchant. He was right. We built this store together, and for a while we were happy. He loved the desert, the mountains, the sense of building something new in an untamed place. But he died," Flynn said gently. 2 years ago, during a particularly harsh winter, pneumonia took him within a week. I was left alone with the store and debts I did not know existed. My father had been generous with credit, too generous sometimes, and collecting what was owed proved difficult. But I managed. I worked every daylight hour, learned to negotiate with suppliers, figured out how to keep the books balanced. It has not been easy, but the store is profitable now, and I have earned the respect of most of the community." "Most," she smiled wryly. "There are always those who believe a woman has no business running a commercial establishment. They prefer to take their business elsewhere, to merchants who wear trousers. But there are not many options in Fort Davis, so even the skeptics eventually come around when they need supplies." Flynn leaned back in his chair, studying her with something like admiration. "You are stronger than you look, Miss Owens. I have had to be. The West does not give you much choice in that regard. You adapt or you perish." They talked through the meal and long after, the conversation ranging from the practical challenges of running a ranch versus a store to their shared memories of life before Texas, to their fears about the approaching war. Flynn spoke of his concerns that the conflict would disrupt supply lines and make ranching even more difficult than it already was. Millicent worried that Fort Davis would be abandoned if the Army needed troops elsewhere, leaving the civilian population vulnerable to attacks from hostile tribes or bandits. But beneath the serious topics, there was something else growing between them. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. They were both young people who had been forced by circumstances to shoulder responsibilities beyond their years, who had survived loss and loneliness and emerged stronger if not entirely unscathed. They understood each other in a way that needed no explanation. When Flynn finally rose to leave, well after dark, he paused at the door. "Thank you for the meal and the conversation, Miss Owens. I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed an evening so thoroughly." "Millicent," she said impulsively. "Please call me Millicent." "Millicent," he repeated, and the way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. "Then you must call me Flynn. Will you come back tomorrow evening, Flynn? after you have finished delivering more of the stolen letters. I would like to hear how the recipients react, and I confess I find your company pleasant." His smile transformed his face, chasing away the shadows that usually haunted his eyes. "I would like that very much. Until tomorrow, then." He descended the stairs into the night, and Millicent stood in the doorway watching him go. The moon was rising over the mountains, painting the desert in shades of silver and shadow. She felt different than she had this morning, as though some fundamental part of her had shifted and realigned. She had started the day believing herself abandoned and alone, and now she held 17 letters from a cousin who loved her and the promise of another evening with a man who made her feel seen in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Flynn and Tommy would spend their days riding out to ranches and homesteads, delivering stolen letters and witnessing the reactions of people who had given up hope of receiving responses to their correspondence. In the evenings, Flynn would return to Millicent's rooms above the store, and they would share a meal and conversation that grew increasingly personal with each passing night. He told her about the ranch, about the challenges of managing 300 head of cattle with only 2 hired hands to help him. He described the landscape of his property, the way the mountains created natural corrals, and how the springs that bubbled up from underground made it possible to water his herds even in the driest months. He spoke of his dreams to expand, to breed better stock, to create something lasting that could be passed down to future generations. She told him about her plans for the store, about her hopes to expand the inventory to include more luxury items that would appeal to the officers' wives at the fort. She confessed her secret ambition to open a lending library in one corner of the store, stocked with books and newspapers that could help ease the intellectual isolation of frontier life. She shared her fears that she would grow old alone, that the independence she had fought so hard to maintain would ultimately leave her without family or connection. "You will not be alone," Flynn said on the 3rd night, his voice rough with emotion. "Not if I have any say in the matter." Millicent's heart stopped. They were sitting on the bench outside her door, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Flynn was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the scent of sage and leather that clung to him. "What are you saying?" she whispered. He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I am saying that these past few days have been the happiest I have known since before my brother died. I am saying that I think of you every moment I am away from you. I am saying that I would very much like to court you properly if you would allow it." Joy surged through her, so intense it was almost painful. "I would allow it. I would welcome it." Flynn reached out and cupped her face in his calloused palm, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "I should tell you that I am not an easy man. I carry ghosts with me, regrets that sometimes make me poor company. My ranch requires hard work and long hours, and there is not much comfort in the life I can offer. But I promise you this, if you will have me, I will never let you feel alone again. I will treasure every word you speak, every letter you write, every moment you give me, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Tears slipped down Millicent's cheeks, but for once they were tears of happiness rather than grief. "That is all I have ever wanted, to be valued, to be treasured, to matter to someone." "You matter to me," Flynn said fiercely, "more than I can properly express." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Millicent had no desire to retreat. She closed the distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. But then Flynn's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and promise and the desperate need to never be alone again. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably leave before I compromise your reputation completely." Millicent laughed breathlessly. "My reputation is already the subject of much speculation in this town. What is one more scandal? Even so, I want to do this properly. I want to court you the way you deserve to be courted. Will you allow me to call on you regularly? Will you let me prove that I am worthy of your affection?" "You have already proven it," Millicent said softly, "by caring enough about stolen letters to seek justice for people you did not know, by seeing my pain and wanting to ease it, by sharing your own grief with me. You are the finest man I have met in Texas, Flynn Zimmer." He kissed her again, soft and sweet, before forcing himself to stand. "I will see you tomorrow. We have a few more letters to deliver, and then Watts will be on his way to wherever men go when they have destroyed their own reputations. But after that, I would very much like to show you my ranch, if you would be willing to make the journey. I would love to see it." After he left, Millicent sat for a long time under the stars, her fingers pressed to her lips, marveling at how quickly life could change. A week ago she had been alone and despairing. Now she had reconnected with her cousin through the recovered letters, and found something she had not even known she was looking for. A man who understood her, who valued her, who looked at her like she was the answer to questions he had been asking for years. The next morning, Tommy Watts appeared at the store one final time. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders slumped with the weight of shame. But there was also something different about him, a kind of humbled maturity that had not been there before. "Miss Owens," he said quietly, "I am leaving Fort Davis today. I resigned from the Pony Express, and I have paid back everyone whose postage I stole. I wanted to thank you for not pressing charges against me. You would have been within your rights to see me jailed or worse." Millicent studied him for a moment. "What will you do now?" "I am going back east. My family has a farm in Ohio. I will help them work the land, live a simpler life. Mr. Zimmer was right. I was not fit to carry mail. I betrayed the trust people placed in me, and I have to live with that. But I wanted you to know that I wrote to your cousin explaining everything. I confessed what I did and asked her forgiveness on your behalf. And I will never forget the look on your face when you read those letters, when you realized you had not been forgotten. That will stay with me for the rest of my life." "Good," Millicent said, not unkindly. "Let it remind you to think about the consequences of your actions, to consider how your choices affect others. We all make mistakes, Mr. Watts. The measure of a person is what they do after the mistake, how they work to make amends." Tommy nodded, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, Miss Owens. I hope you find happiness here." "I believe I already have," she said, thinking of Flynn. After Tommy left, Millicent threw herself into work with renewed energy. She reorganized the entire store, creating a corner where she began assembling the lending library she had dreamed about. She wrote a long letter to Clara, explaining about the stolen correspondence and introducing Flynn, describing the unexpected romance that had blossomed in the wake of tragedy. She felt alive in ways she had not felt since before her father died, connected to the world and excited about the future. Flynn came by every evening, sometimes just for a few minutes if he had pressing work on the ranch, other times for hours of conversation and stolen kisses in the shadows of the porch. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers he had picked during his rides, a piece of quartz crystal he had found that caught the light in beautiful ways, a book of poetry he had carried with him from his old life and wanted to share with her. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Tommy Watts, Flynn arrived in a wagon rather than on horseback. Millicent was helping a customer when she heard the rattle of wheels outside and looked up to see him climbing down from the driver's seat. "Are you ready?" he called up to her. She had almost forgotten. Today was the day he was going to take her to see his ranch. She quickly finished the transaction, hung the closed sign on the door, and grabbed her bonnet. The ride to Flynn's ranch took nearly 3 hours, the wagon bouncing over rough terrain that tested Millicent's ability to maintain her seat. But Flynn was an expert driver, navigating the path with ease while pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land. "That peak there, we call it Eagle's Roost because there is a nest at the top where a pair of eagles return every spring. And that arroyo is where I found a lost calf last summer, stuck in the mud after a flash flood. Nearly broke my leg getting down there to pull him out, but he survived and grew into a fine steer." Millicent drank it all in, fascinated by this glimpse into Flynn's daily life. The desert landscape that had seemed harsh and forbidding when she first arrived in Texas now revealed its hidden beauties. Wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places, splashes of red and yellow against the brown earth. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks touched by clouds. When they finally crested a ridge and Flynn's ranch came into view, Millicent caught her breath. The house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a bunkhouse for the hired hands, corrals for the horses, and beyond it all, grazing peacefully in a wide valley, were more cattle than she had ever seen in one place. "It is beautiful," she breathed. Flynn pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down. "It is home, or at least it has been, but it has felt empty these past few years, too quiet, too lonely." He led her up onto the porch and opened the door. The interior was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade pieces that were functional rather than decorative. But there were touches that spoke of care. Curtains on the windows, books on a shelf, a photograph on the mantel of 2 young men who could only be Flynn and his brother, arms around each other's shoulders and smiling at the camera. "That was taken the year before Lucas left," Flynn said, following her gaze. "We had just successfully driven our first herd to market and made a good profit. We thought we were masters of the world, that nothing could touch us. We were so young and so certain we had all the time in the world." Millicent moved closer to the photograph, studying the faces. Flynn had been more carefree then, his smile wider and his eyes clear of shadows. "He looks like you. Everyone said so. We could almost pass for twins despite the age difference." She turned to face him. "Thank you for showing me this, for trusting me with your grief." Flynn crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Millicent, I need to ask you something important. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, and by all rights I should wait longer before speaking. But I am not a patient man when it comes to matters of the heart, and I cannot bear the thought of losing more time to hesitation and fear." Her heart began to pound. "What are you asking?" He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I am asking you to marry me. To leave the store and come here to be my wife. To help me turn this lonely house into a home. To build a life with me, to face whatever the future brings together. I know it is fast, and I know you have worked hard to build your independence. I am not asking you to give up who you are. I am asking you to share who you are with me, to let me share myself with you. Will you marry me, Millicent Owens?" Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Flynn surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. She clung to him, dizzy with joy and the sudden certainty that this was right, that everything in her life had been leading to this moment. When they finally broke apart, Flynn was grinning like a boy given an unexpected gift. "We should probably tell people. Make it official. I want everyone to know that you have agreed to be my wife." "We could ride back to town today," Millicent suggested. "Tell the preacher, post banns, do everything properly." "Or," Flynn said slowly, his eyes dancing, "we could do it much faster than that. The commanding officer at Fort Davis is empowered to perform marriages. If we could convince him to do the ceremony, we could be married within the week." Millicent laughed, exhilarated by the idea. "You are serious. You want to marry me in a week?" "I want to marry you tomorrow if it were possible, but I suppose a week will have to do." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Flynn showed her the rest of the ranch, introducing her to his two hired hands, Miguel and Samuel, who greeted her with surprised but genuine warmth. They seemed pleased that their boss had finally found someone to share his life with, and they assured Millicent that they would help however they could with the transition. Flynn showed her the garden plot where they grew vegetables during the growing season, the spring-fed pond where the cattle drank, the hills where the best grazing could be found. He talked about his dreams for expansion, his hope to improve the quality of his breeding stock, his plans to build a bigger barn. And in every sentence, in every gesture, he included her. "We could do this. We will work on that. Our children will play here." By the time they started back to town, the sun was setting and Millicent's head was spinning with possibilities. She would have to sell the store or hire someone to manage it. She would have to pack up her belongings, say goodbye to the life she had built alone. But none of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like stepping into a future that was brighter and fuller than anything she had imagined for herself. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Flynn spoke to the commanding officer at the fort, who agreed to perform the ceremony. Millicent found a buyer for the store, a widow named Mrs. Peterson, who had been looking for a way to support herself and had the business sense to keep it running profitably. The terms were generous. Mrs. Peterson would make monthly payments, giving Millicent a steady income even after she moved to the ranch. The women of Fort Davis rallied around Millicent, helping her prepare for the wedding with an enthusiasm that surprised and touched her. They sewed a dress from white muslin, simple but elegant. They prepared food for the celebration that would follow the ceremony. They shared advice about married life on the frontier, some of it practical and some of it scandalous enough to make Millicent blush. Clara's response to Millicent's letter arrived 3 days before the wedding, carried by the new Pony Express rider who had taken Tommy Watt's place. Her cousin was thrilled about the upcoming marriage and sent her blessing along with a beautiful lace handkerchief that had belonged to Millicent's mother. "Wear this at your wedding," Clara wrote, "and know that Mama would be so happy to see you marrying for love. She always wanted that for you." The night before the wedding, Millicent stood in her rooms above the store for the last time. Everything had been packed, her belongings ready to be loaded onto Flynn's wagon in the morning. The space that had been her home for 5 years looked stark and unfamiliar with all her personal touches removed. There was a knock at the door, and she opened it to find Flynn standing there, his expression serious. "I know it is bad luck to see the bride the night before the wedding," he said. "But I could not let this day end without making sure you were certain. Millicent, if you have any doubts, any reservations about marrying me, please tell me now. I will not be angry. I will wait as long as you need, or I will let you go if that is what you truly want. But I need to know that you are choosing this freely." Millicent pulled him inside and closed the door behind him. "I have no doubts. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Tomorrow I am going to marry you, Flynn Zimmer, and I am going to spend the rest of my life being grateful for the day a Pony Express rider stole my letters, and you decided to seek justice. Flynn's expression softened into a smile. When you put it that way, I suppose I should thank Tommy Watts. If he had not been a thief, I never would have met you. Strange how the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, Millicent mused. If my father had not died, I might have left Texas years ago. If Clara's letters had reached me as they should have, I might not have been standing on that porch at exactly the right moment to see you confronting Tommy. It is as though everything was conspiring to bring us together. Or perhaps we were meant to find each other, Flynn said softly. Perhaps all the pain and loss we have both endured was preparing us to recognize what we had when we finally met. He kissed her gently, sweetly, a promise of all the kisses yet to come. I will see you tomorrow, future Mrs. Zimmer. After he left, Millicent lay awake for hours, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow her life would change completely. Tomorrow she would become a wife, would take on the responsibilities and joys of partnership. Tomorrow she would start writing a new chapter, one filled with love and hope, and the kind of connection she had been starving for without even fully realizing it. The wedding took place in the chapel at Fort Davis, a small building that served as both church and meeting hall for the military community. The commanding officer, Colonel Henderson, performed the ceremony with military precision and surprising warmth. Miguel and Samuel stood up for Flynn, and Mrs. Peterson and another shopkeeper's wife stood with Millicent. But Millicent had eyes only for Flynn. He stood straight and tall in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed for once, and his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. When it came time to say their vows, his voice rang out clear and strong, leaving no doubt about his commitment. I, Flynn Zimmer, take you, Millicent Owens, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to stand beside you in times of hardship and celebrate with you in times of joy. I promise to never let you feel alone again, to treasure every word you speak, to carry your letters close to my heart. I give you my life, my love, and my solemn word that I will be faithful to you until death parts us. Millicent's own voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her vows. I, Millicent Owens, take you, Flynn Zimmer, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to support you in all your endeavors, to share your burdens and your triumphs. I promise to make our house a home, to fill the silence with love and laughter. I give you my heart freely, knowing it will be treasured, and I pledge my life to building a future with you. When Colonel Henderson pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn pulled Millicent into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the assembled guests. The celebration that followed was loud and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible given the limited resources of the frontier. But eventually the sun set, and it was time for Flynn to take his bride home. They climbed into the wagon, now loaded with Millicent's belongings, and began the journey to the ranch. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "Are you happy?" Flynn asked, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "Happier than I have ever been," Millicent said truthfully. "I feel like I have been holding my breath for years and I can finally exhale. I know what you mean. I did not realize how much I had closed myself off after Lucas died until I met you and felt something opening up inside me again. You have given me back my life, Millicent. We have given each other our lives," she corrected. "That is what partnership means." They reached the ranch well after midnight, and Flynn carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. The house was dark and quiet, lit only by the lamp Flynn had left burning in the window. He set her down gently in the main room and cupped her face in his hands. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmer." "It feels right," Millicent whispered, Being here with you, it feels like where I am meant to be." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and bound more tightly together than any ceremony could accomplish. Afterward, lying in Flynn's arms in the darkness, Millicent felt a peace settle over her that she had not known was possible. This was home. This was love. This was the beginning of everything she had been searching for. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Millicent had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and long days that left her exhausted by sunset. She had to figure out how to cook for 3 men with hearty appetites, how to manage the garden in the harsh desert climate, how to ride well enough to accompany Flynn when he checked on the herds. But Flynn was a patient teacher, and Miguel and Samuel were kind about her mistakes. Gradually, she found her footing, discovering that she had a knack for managing the ranch's finances and dealing with the buyers who came looking for cattle. She took over the bookkeeping, organized their supplies more efficiently, and even negotiated better prices with their suppliers in town. Flynn watched her growing confidence with obvious pride. "You are a natural at this," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think the ranch is more profitable now than it has ever been, thanks to your business sense." "We make a good team," Millicent said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You handle the cattle and the land, I handle the numbers and the negotiations. Together we are formidable." "Together we are unstoppable," Flynn agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Letters from Clara arrived regularly now, and Millicent treasured each one. Her cousin wrote about the escalating tensions in St. Louis, about families divided by the question of secession, about her decision to remain at the school even as some of her colleagues resigned to support the Confederate cause. She asked detailed questions about married life, about the ranch, about Flynn, and Millicent answered each one with equal detail, painting pictures with words of her new life in Texas. As summer turned to fall and fall gave way to winter, Millicent began to suspect she might be pregnant. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain before raising Flynn's hopes. But as her suspicions became certainty, she found herself bursting with the need to share the news. She chose a quiet evening when the work was done and they were alone in the house. Flynn was reading by lamplight, and she settled beside him on the sofa they had recently purchased from a furniture maker in Fort Davis. "Flynn, I need to tell you something." He set down his book immediately, his expression concerned. "What is wrong? Are you feeling ill?" "Not ill exactly. Though I have been feeling queasy in the mornings and certain smells make me nauseous, and I have missed my monthly courses for 2 months now." It took a moment for understanding to dawn on Flynn's face, and when it did, his expression transformed into something like awe. "You are with child." "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby," Millicent confirmed, tears of joy streaming down her face. Flynn whooped with delight and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the room until she was dizzy and laughing. He set her down gently, immediately solicitous. "I should not have done that. I need to be more careful. You are carrying precious cargo now." "I am not made of glass," Millicent protested, but she was smiling. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am going to be fine. You are going to be more than fine. You are going to be magnificent." Flynn knelt before her and placed his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father speaking. I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. And your mother and I are going to give you the best life we possibly can." Millicent ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by love for this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. "Our child is very lucky to have you as a father." "Our child is lucky to have both of us," Flynn said, rising to kiss her. And I am the luckiest man alive to have found you. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the challenges of frontier life. Millicent continued working as long as she was able, only gradually scaling back her activities as her belly grew. Flynn became increasingly protective, fussing over her in ways that were simultaneously annoying and endearing. When her time came in late spring of 1862, it was a difficult labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. The midwife from town stayed with her throughout, and Flynn paced the porch wearing a path in the wood while Miguel and Samuel tried unsuccessfully to distract him with talk of cattle and weather. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, the thin wail of a newborn filled the house. Flynn burst through the door to find Millicent exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Flynn approached slowly as though afraid he might break something with his presence. But when he looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, all his fear melted into wonder. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Millicent asked. Flynn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his son's face. "Lucas. I would like to name him Lucas if that is acceptable to you, in memory of my brother." Millicent felt tears prick her eyes. "Lucas Zimmer. It is a good, strong name. Your brother would be honored." "Lucas Flynn Zimmer," Flynn amended, "so that he carries both our histories with him." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out to touch one tiny hand. Lucas's fingers immediately curled around his father's calloused finger, gripping with surprising strength. "He knows you already," Millicent whispered. "I hope so. I hope he always knows how much he is wanted, how much he is loved." Flynn looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Millicent. Thank you for giving me back a brother in a way. Thank you for our son. Thank you for making my life full again." "Thank you for finding me," Millicent replied. "Thank you for caring about stolen letters. Thank you for making justice important enough to pursue. If you had not confronted Tommy Watts that day, we might never have met." "Then I suppose something good came from all that trouble after all," Flynn said with a smile. "Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Lucas proved to be a healthy child with strong lungs and an appetite to match." Millicent navigated the challenges of new motherhood with the same determination she had applied to running her store and learning ranch life. And Flynn proved to be a devoted father who was not afraid of dirty diapers or midnight feedings. The war that raged back east felt distant and unreal in their remote corner of Texas. They received news of battles and political upheaval through newspapers that arrived weeks late, and letters from Clara that painted an increasingly grim picture of life in the divided nation. But on the ranch, life continued with its own rhythms of seasons and cattle and family. When Lucas was 6 months old, Millicent discovered she was pregnant again. Flynn was thrilled, already imagining a house full of children, and the sound of laughter echoing through the rooms that had been silent for so long. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara Margaret after Millicent's cousin and Flynn's mother, arrived in the spring of 1863. She was smaller than Lucas had been but no less strong-willed, and from her first breath she demanded attention and got it. "She is going to be a force to be reckoned with," Flynn predicted, watching his daughter nurse with fierce determination. "Just like her mother." "And her father," Millicent added. "She gets her stubbornness from both sides of the family." By the time the war finally ended in 1865, the Zimmer Ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. Flynn and Millicent had expanded their herd, built new outbuildings, and established a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. They had also added a third child to their family, another son named Thomas after Millicent's father. Clara visited that summer, making the long journey from St. Louis to meet her namesake and see the life her cousin had built. She arrived travel-worn but delighted, and spent a month at the ranch marveling at everything Millicent had accomplished. "You have done so well for yourself," Clara said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play. Lucas was 4 now, chasing his sister through the yard while baby Thomas dozed in Millicent's arms. "I worried about you so much after Uncle Edward died, alone in that rough town. But look at you now. You have a family, a home, a husband who adores you. You are happy." "I am," Millicent agreed. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be, and it all started with stolen letters and a cowboy who cared enough to seek justice." "Tell me again how you met," Clara begged. "I love that story." So Millicent told her again, about the confrontation in the street, about reading 17 letters in one sitting while tears streamed down her face, about Flynn standing witness to her pain and vowing to make things right. She talked about their whirlwind courtship, the quick wedding, the adjustment to married life and motherhood. And through it all, Clara listened with rapt attention, sighing at the romantic parts and laughing at the funny anecdotes. "You know," Clara said when the story was finished, "in a strange way you should thank that awful Tommy Watts. If he had not stolen the letters, Flynn would have had no reason to come to town that day. You might never have met." "I have thought about that," Millicent admitted. "It does not excuse what he did, but I suppose even terrible actions can lead to unexpected blessings. I hope he found peace back in Ohio with his family. I hope he learned from his mistakes and became a better man." "You are too generous," Clara said. "But I suppose that is part of why Flynn loves you so much. You see the possibility for redemption in everyone." That evening, after the children were in bed and Clara had retired to the guest room, Millicent and Flynn sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. Flynn's arm was around her shoulders and she leaned into his warmth, feeling utterly content. "I love our life," she said softly. "I love what we have built together, but sometimes I still cannot quite believe it is real. That I went from being so alone to having all of this. You, the children, the ranch, a future full of possibilities." "It is real," Flynn assured her. "And it is only going to get better. We have our whole lives ahead of us, Millicent. Our children will grow up strong and happy. We will watch them make their own way in the world. We will grow old together on this land, surrounded by family and love. That is my promise to you. And you always keep your promises," Millicent said, tilting her face up for a kiss. "Always," Flynn agreed against her lips. "From the moment I promised to make Tommy Watts deliver every stolen letter personally to the vow I made on our wedding day, I have never broken a promise to you, and I never will." The years rolled by with the steady rhythm of seasons. The children grew, adding 2 more siblings to the family. Another daughter named Victoria and a youngest son they called Henry. The ranch prospered, weathering droughts and economic downturns through careful management and hard work. Miguel and Samuel remained with them, becoming like family, eventually bringing wives of their own to the ranch and starting their own families. Lucas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who showed an early aptitude for ranching. He would follow Flynn around the property, asking endless questions about cattle and land management, absorbing information like a sponge. Clara proved to be as strong-willed as predicted, but also compassionate and protective of her younger siblings. Thomas had his grandfather's head for numbers and helped Millicent with the bookkeeping as soon as he was old enough. Victoria inherited her father's love of horses and could ride before she could properly walk. And Henry, the baby, was the family charmer, able to get away with mischief through sheer force of personality. Millicent and Flynn watched their family grow with pride and gratitude. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Flynn arranged for Miguel to watch the children so he could take Millicent on a private picnic to a beautiful overlook on their property. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Flynn pulled a small package from his pocket. "I have something for you." Millicent unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal, beautiful and clearly expensive. "Flynn, it is lovely, but what is it for?" "For writing," he said simply. "You once told me about wanting to open a lending library, about how much you valued books and the written word. I thought perhaps you might like to write your own book, our story. The story of how a Pony Express rider stole your letters and a cowboy made him deliver each one personally, and how that led to everything we have now." Tears filled Millicent's eyes. "You remembered that conversation. That was years ago, before we were even married." "I remember everything you have ever told me," Flynn said seriously. "Every word is precious to me, just like those letters you wrote to Clara were precious, even though they were stolen for a time. Words matter, Millicent, your words especially. I want you to write them down so our children and grandchildren can read them someday, so they can know exactly how their parents fell in love." Millicent hugged the journal to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I will write it. I will write every detail, from the moment I saw you confronting Tommy in the street to this very moment right now. I will make sure everyone knows that love can grow from the strangest circumstances, that sometimes terrible things happen to put us exactly where we need to be. And that letters matter," Flynn added with a smile. "Never forget that part. If I had not cared so deeply about the sanctity of the mail, none of this would have happened. If you had not been the kind of man who cared about justice for strangers," Millicent corrected. "That is what made me fall in love with you, Flynn. Not just that you uncovered the theft, but that you cared enough to do something about it. You saw people being hurt and you could not walk away." "I saw you being hurt," Flynn said, reaching out to cup her cheek. "And I knew in that moment, watching you read those letters with tears streaming down your face, that I would do anything to protect you from ever hurting like that again. I think I started falling in love with you right then, even though I did not have words for it yet. I started falling in love with you when you told me about your brother," Millicent confessed, "when you trusted me with your pain and your regret. I knew then that you were someone worth knowing, worth loving." They kissed as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The desert evening was cool and peaceful, and in the distance they could hear the lowing of cattle and the call of night birds beginning their evening songs. "We should probably get back," Millicent said reluctantly. "The children will be wondering where we are." "Let them wonder a little longer," Flynn said, pulling her closer. "I want to spend just a few more minutes alone with my wife, remembering how it felt before we had 5 small humans demanding our constant attention." Millicent laughed and settled more comfortably against him. "Do you ever regret it, having so many children so quickly?" "Sometimes I worry we did not have enough time as just the 2 of us." "I regret nothing," Flynn said firmly. "Every child is a blessing. Every moment of chaos and noise and exhaustion is worth it because I get to share it with you. Our lives are full in the best possible way, Millicent. We are not alone. We will never be alone again." And that, Millicent thought, was the heart of everything. They had both come from places of terrible loneliness, had both experienced the pain of loss and isolation. But they had found each other against all odds, and in finding each other they had created a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued to pass in a blur of activity and growth. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path. Lucas took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself a worthy successor to Flynn. Clara shocked everyone by deciding to become a teacher like her namesake aunt, opening a small school in Fort Davis for the children of ranchers and soldiers. Thomas went to San Antonio to study law, determined to bring justice and order to the still wild Texas frontier. Victoria married a horse breeder and moved to California, writing letters filled with descriptions of the Pacific Ocean that her younger siblings read with wonder. Henry, true to form, could not decide on a single path and tried everything from prospecting to journalism before eventually returning to the ranch to help Lucas. Through it all, Millicent and Flynn remained the center of their expanding universe. They were the grandparents who spoiled their grandchildren with stories and sweets. They were the wise counselors their children turned to for advice. They were the example of what love should look like: steady, supportive, enduring. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a huge celebration at the ranch. Nearly 100 people attended, a testament to the connections Flynn and Millicent had built over the years. The party lasted late into the night, with music and dancing and countless toasts to the couple who had built such an impressive life together. But the moment Millicent treasured most came late in the evening when she and Flynn slipped away from the crowds to stand together under the stars. The sounds of celebration drifted to them on the night air, but here in this quiet space it was just the two of them. 25 years, Flynn marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was confronting Tommy Watts in the street. Other times it feels like we have been together forever, like I cannot remember a time when you were not beside me. I know what you mean, Millicent said, lacing her fingers through his. Their hands fit together perfectly, shaped by years of holding onto each other. I was thinking today about that first evening when you came for dinner, how nervous I was. I wanted so badly for you to like me, for the evening to go well. I think even then I knew you were going to be important to me. I knew it too, Flynn admitted. Walking up those stairs to your rooms, I felt like I was walking toward my future. And I was right. You were my future, Millicent. You are my present and you will be my always. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The desert night was cool and clear, perfect for appreciating the vastness of the sky and the smallness of human concerns in the face of such immensity. You remember what you said to me on our wedding night? Flynn asked suddenly. You said being with me felt like where you were meant to be. I remember. It is still true, 25 years later. I want you to know that I feel the same way. Every day with you has been exactly where I was meant to be. Every moment we have shared, every challenge we have faced together, every joy we have celebrated, it has all led me to this perfect moment right now where I get to hold you and know that you are mine and I am yours. Millicent turned in his arms to face him fully, reaching up to touch his face. He was older now, gray threading through his dark hair and lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. But he was still the man who had stolen her heart in the dusty streets of Fort Davis, still the man who valued justice and kept his promises and loved her with his whole being. I love you, she said simply. I will always love you. And I will always love you, Flynn replied, bending to kiss her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding day. The party continued around them, their children and grandchildren celebrating the love story that had started it all. But for Millicent and Flynn, the only thing that mattered was this moment, this connection, this absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find in each other. As they grew older, Flynn and Millicent gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting Lucas and Henry to handle the work while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. They spent their time tending the garden, reading together on the porch, and writing in the journal Flynn had given Millicent all those years ago. The journal had grown into several volumes by now, a complete record of their life together written in Millicent's careful hand. When Millicent's cousin Clara passed away at the age of 68, Millicent took her namesake daughter and granddaughter to St. Louis for the funeral. It was Millicent's first trip back to civilization in years, and the cities felt overwhelming after so long in the peace of the desert. But saying goodbye to the woman who had been her link to her childhood, who had written those precious stolen letters all those years ago, was important. They scattered Clara's ashes in the garden of the school where she had taught for 40 years, and Millicent told stories about their childhood to anyone who would listen. She talked about how Clara's letters had been stolen and how that theft had inadvertently led to the greatest love of Millicent's life. "It is strange how things work out," young Clara said as they prepared to return to Texas. "If Aunt Clara's letters had arrived as they should have, you might never have been standing on that porch when grandfather confronted the thief. You might have married someone else or no one at all." "I have thought about that many times over the years," Millicent admitted. "And while I would never wish for letters to be stolen, I cannot help but be grateful for the chain of events that led me to your grandfather. Some things are meant to be, even if the path to them is crooked and painful." Back at the ranch, Flynn was waiting for them, and Millicent flew into his arms with the relief of coming home. At 73, he was still strong and vital, though he moved more slowly now and sometimes complained about aches in his joints on cold mornings. "I missed you," he murmured into her hair. "The house is too quiet without you. I missed you too, but I needed to say goodbye to Clara. She was important to me, I know, and I am glad you went, but I am gladder that you are home now." They settled back into their routine, treasuring each day as the gift it was. They had lived full lives, rich with love and family and purpose. They had seen the frontier transform from a wild and dangerous place into something more civilized, though still beautifully untamed. They had weathered personal tragedies and celebrated countless triumphs. And through it all, they had done it together. Flynn passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Millicent beside him and their children gathered around the bed. His last words were, "I love you," directed at his wife, and his last breath was drawn while holding her hand. Millicent grieved deeply, but not desperately. She had known this day would come, had prepared herself as much as anyone can prepare for the loss of their great love. But she also knew that she had been blessed beyond measure to have had so many years with Flynn, to have built a life and a family with him, to have been loved so completely. She lived another 6 years after Flynn's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She finished the journal, bringing the story right up to Flynn's death, and her own acceptance that their time together had been everything it needed to be. On her 86th birthday, surrounded by family, Millicent told the story one last time. About the Pony Express rider who stole her letters for months, and the cowboy who made him deliver, each one personally. About falling in love over shared meals and stolen kisses on the porch. About building a life in the harsh beauty of West Texas and raising a family that would carry their legacy forward. "Never forget," she told the rapt audience of descendants, "that love can come from the most unexpected places, that justice matters, that words matter. That sometimes the worst things that happen to us are setting the stage for the best things we could never have imagined. Your grandfather and I found each other because of stolen letters and a man who cared enough to make things right. And from that small beginning, we created all of this, you and you and you. Every single one of you exists because a cowboy decided that the sanctity of the male was worth fighting for." She died peacefully 3 weeks later, slipping away in the same bed where she had spent so many happy nights with Flynn. Her children buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and they planted wildflowers over both graves so that every spring the hillside would blaze with color. The journals Millicent had kept were passed down through the family, treasured as the primary source of their history. Future generations would read about the Pony Express rider and the cowboy, about the stolen letters that led to true love, about the life built in the unforgiving beauty of West Texas. And in the reading, they would understand that love is not always gentle or easy, but it is always worth fighting for. That sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the greatest blessings. That words have power, whether written in letters or spoken as vows. That family is built not just through blood, but through commitment and choice, and the daily decision to show up for the people you love. The Zimmer Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the solid foundation Flynn and Millicent had built. The house was expanded and modernized, but the porch where they had shared so many evenings remained unchanged, a sacred space where descendants would come to feel close to the couple whose love story had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet desert evenings when the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, people said you could feel their presence there. Flynn and Millicent, together as they had always been, watching over the family and the land they had loved so well. The story of how a Pony Express rider stole letters for months and a cowboy made him deliver, each one personally became a cherished family legend, told and retold with embellishments and laughter and tears. But at its heart, the story remained simple and true. Two lonely people found each other against the odds, and in finding each other they found everything they had been missing. They built a life of purpose and meaning. They loved deeply and completely. And they left behind a legacy that would endure long after the last echo of their voices had faded from the desert air. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in hardship and joy, and perfected through decades of partnership. And it all started with stolen letters and a man who cared enough to seek justice, who valued the written word enough to fight for its sanctity, and who found the love of his life in the process. In the end, that was the lesson the family took from Flynn and Millicent's story, that caring about things that matter, fighting for justice even when it does not directly benefit you, and staying open to unexpected connections can change the entire course of your life. That sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. That love, when it is real and true and founded on mutual respect and shared values, can withstand anything life throws at it. The journals sat in a place of honor in the ranch house, passed from generation to generation, each new reader discovering the magic of those early days when Fort Davis was still a rough frontier town, and the Pony Express was the fastest way to send a message across the vast distances of the West. They read about confrontations in dusty streets and stolen letters finally delivered. They read about love blooming in unexpected soil and a family growing against the harsh backdrop of the Texas desert. And they understood, in reading those carefully penned words, that they were the inheritors of something precious. Not just land or money or material possessions, but a legacy of love and commitment and the absolute certainty that family means everything. They understood that Flynn and Millicent had given them more than just existence. They had given them an example of what a life well lived looked like, of what true partnership meant, of how to build something lasting in an uncertain world. The story lived on, passed from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild, changing slightly with each telling but always maintaining its essential truth. A Pony Express rider stole letters for months. A cowboy made him deliver each one personally. And in doing so, he found the woman who would become his wife, his partner, his everything. Together they built an empire of love and family that stretched across generations and continues still. Rooted in the red earth of West Texas and reaching toward the infinite possibilities of the future, enduring and beautiful and absolutely, perfectly complete.